Okay, here's a little project that I started. It's actually a little covered bridge. And what I did was I found a drawing online and put a put together a um, reference using this as my reference. Guy by the name of Wambach. Okay, the Chamberlin Bridge. And I thought, okay, that'll make it that'll make a nice little reference. So I use this as my reference for overdrawing. So I created from this my reference drawing. So let me turn this off here. Okay, so there's my reference drawing. So I'm using this as my basis for my drawing on this. So the first thing I did was I laid in just inked in over the top to get a rough idea of what the covered bridge looked like. And then I created some clouds. So with my cloud background, and I may modify it later, I just use something called the salty watercolor brush, and it does a good job of laying in clouds. So from there, I created an underlay. And so with my underlay, I'm starting to add the colors and the textures within the bounds of my reference drawing, my inked reference drawing. So I'm able to go up here and choose my specific tools. In this case, I used an inking pen here that I'm doing some of the washed out gray look for the inside of the bridge. You can see I've laid down some of the lighter washed out gray on some of the timbers. And so I just simply come in behind here. These are all the void, the void spaces. Let me get my correct thing here. All of the void spaces in the inside ceiling. And so I just kind of start laying down a boundary here that I can work with. Again, I'm not interested at this point for it being really, really precise because I'm going to go back and use other tools like my wash brush and move things around, give it a more watercolor look. So I could do some things like laying in the roof section here. You can see I'm using the shift key so I get nice straight lines here that I want, and it just makes it easier. I could use the paint bucket and go through and fill these spaces in with a nice uniform look, but it won't do as nice a job when I come back with the watercolor brushes and start basically moving things around like you would with a wet on wet. And so you can see over here I've got what's called a watercolor brush, and you can see what happens is when I start pulling on it, it starts distorting what I have here. I'll come over here. It starts distorting it and moving it around and giving it more of a wet look. Here you can see I've done some pulling of some of the colors. The nice thing is it'll pick up on the underlay there and create kind of a burnished look, if you will. So I just come in here and I just start moving, after I get it laid down the way I want, I just start moving the colors in and laying them down so that they're just kind of floating uh, and give me that nice watercolor look. So you can see the texture there is a little different. If I come over here, I've got a little different texture because it's the brush is actually picking up the sensation of the white around it. So it gives me that nice um, watercolor look. And I could do the same thing. See if I do on the beams here. If I pull the light color in the beams, I can start to get a washed look with the beams. So as I'm going through and learning these, I'm finding out what things I can do with different brushes to get different types of textures. Um, Zooming in and out, pretty easy here, moving the canvas around. It's nice because I can, just like a piece of paper, I can move the canvas around to get the angle that I want if I don't feel like I'm getting a good feel for that. So you look at it here, I've got my layer panel over here that allows me to open and close layers that I'm working on and isolate. I can lock layers. Right now I've got my reference layer locked so I don't accidentally write over the top of it. I don't want anything in the reference layer. So, as I go through, right now I've got one of my brush sets selected here. I think it's an artistic brush set. Yeah, the artist brush set. And it gives me a selection of brushes that I like to use. I like using this watercolor, this salty watercolor for laying in the clouds. It does a good job. The inking tip, of course, I can adjust the size of the tip and the opacity, which I can control very nicely, and then I can use it to lay in some of the colors on the larger pieces here. The brush I like because I can move the color around just like watercolor later. There are other brushes here that I also use, some in this palette, some in this palette. This one right here is particularly nice for laying in and doing some additional things with the clouds and things around the edge if I want it to make it to look like I've got a little bit of brush growing on the edges here. So you can see at this point I've got one, two, three, four, five, six layers counting the background, and I don't have anything going on with the background. I did select a background color here, but it eventually just turns itself off. Um, I can get kind of the hue and saturation here with different types of colors here in the background if I want. So this is early in the stage. It's still pretty rough. I've laid in, my reference, and I've laid in some of my colors, and I'm just working my way through right now with the underlay uh, under my ink drawing. You can see the difference here when I turn the ink on and off. So we'll come back to this later and we'll see how it's progressing.